rethinking how tarot should actually be taught. Most tarot education begins with a deck and a promise. Learn the meanings, remember the keywords, and interpretation will follow. The student is introduced to 78 cards, each carrying its own symbolic vocabulary. The task appears straightforward: memorize first, interpret later. This approach feels logical because tarot does contain symbols, and symbols appear to require definitions. The problem is that this method quietly teaches the wrong cognitive model of how tarot actually works. When tarot is taught as a collection of meanings, students never learn how interpretation is constructed. They collect fragments without understanding how those fragments relate. The Five of Cups means disappointment, the Empress means growth, the Tower means sudden change. But when these cards appear together, the reader hesitates. The knowledge exists, yet the interpretation does not. The student searches for the correct answer instead of building one. This is where tarot pedagogy diverges. It does not begin from meanings, it begins from structure. The core shift from memorization to symbolic literacy. Your teaching model reframes tarot as a symbolic language rather than a vocabulary. Cards are not treated as isolated definitions. They are treated as components that interact. Meaning emerges from relationship, not from memorization. This shift changes the student's role. Instead of recalling meanings, they learn to construct interpretations. A card no longer delivers a fixed message. It represents a symbolic function that changes depending on context. The reading becomes an act of synthesis rather than retrieval. This is also where intuition begins to change shape. In many tarot systems, intuition is treated as something mystical that appears once enough meanings have been memorized. In practice, intuition often emerges from pattern recognition. When students learn to see structural relationships between cards, interpretation becomes fluid. What appears as intuition is frequently the mind recognizing symbolic structure before it is consciously articulated. Your pedagogy, therefore, does not replace intuition, it builds it. Why traditional tarot teaching creates fragile readers. Most beginner confusion comes from the same source. Students learn tarot in the wrong order. They are taught card meanings before they understand how cards interact. The result is a reader who knows many meanings but lacks interpretive coherence. This creates fragile interpretation. When the spread is simple, the reader feels confident. When the spread becomes complex, the reader becomes uncertain. The structure has never been learned, only the vocabulary. Your pedagogical model reverses this. Structure comes first, meanings come second. The student learns how interpretation works before learning what each card might suggest. This reduces overwhelm and increases flexibility. Instead of trying to remember 78 meanings, the student learns a system that generates meaning. This difference may seem subtle, but it changes how tarot is understood. The deck stops being a list. It becomes a map, cards as functions, not labels. Another defining element of your pedagogy is the move from static meaning to symbolic function. Cards are not treated as personality labels or fixed outcomes. They are treated as processes. The Emperor does not simply mean authority. It represents structure, boundary, control, or organization. The Devil does not simply mean negativity. It represents attachment, pattern, entanglement, or compulsion. These are not identities, they are dynamics. This approach prevents deterministic reading. Instead of declaring what a card means, the reader explores how the symbolic function may appear. The surrounding cards shape expression. Context becomes essential. Interpretation becomes flexible, but not arbitrary. This also shifts tarot away from fortune-telling language towards psychological pattern recognition. The reading becomes less about prediction and more about understanding how a pattern might unfold. Context creates meaning. One of the most important teaching principles in this model is that cards do not carry meaning alone. Meaning is created through relationship. A single card can be interpreted in many ways. 2 cards begin to create direction. 3 cards introduce pattern. Larger spreads introduce structure. The reader is trained to observe repetition, contrast, and emphasis. This encourages slower, more thoughtful interpretation. Instead of reacting to individual cards, the reader looks for symbolic architecture. What repeats? What conflicts? What supports? What shifts? These questions transform tarot from reactive interpretation into structural reading. Students begin to see that the meaning of a card changes depending on where it appears and what surrounds it. The same card in 2 spreads can describe entirely different dynamics. This flexibility becomes easier once cards are understood as functions rather than fixed definitions. Tarot becomes a system instead of a mystery. When tarot is taught as memorization, the deck remains mysterious in a superficial way. The reader relies on meanings that feel external. Interpretation appears intuitive but often lacks structure. When tarot is taught as symbolic language, the system becomes visible. The reader understands why an interpretation makes sense. The cards stop feeling random. They begin to form coherent patterns. The real transformation is subtle but profound. The reader is no longer searching for the correct meaning. They are learning to see the structure behind the symbols. If you would like to read this essay, you can find the full article in the Celestial Letters blog. The link is included in this podcast description. This has been a Celestial Letter from Astral Moon Magic.